Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar today. Good to see everybody today. Jen, are you feeling good today? I'm feeling good.
Feeling great. It's a great day.
Yeah, exactly. This gray, rainy day here in Atlanta. Hey, thank you everybody for joining us. We'd love to see who you are, name, church, location. If you want to throw that in the chat, we would love to see where everybody is from today coming in. Thank you for joining us and carving some time out of your busy afternoon. For some of you West Coasters may be here before lunch. So thank you for joining us. Um, uh, oh, if we've never met, I know I saw some people I recognize in the room. So I know I saw Jason Summers in there and some other people I know. So Greg Howder, I see Greg there. But if we've never met before, my name is Louis Lavoie, and I'm on staff with Irresistible Church Network. So glad I get to be here with you today. And so, I see Kaylee from Ascent Church. Good to see you, Kaylee. And so if we've never met, like I said, I'm Louis with ICN. And if this is one of your first times ever interacting with ICN, Irresistible Church Network, I just want you to know that our whole heart and our whole goal and our passion is to help church leaders go further, faster in ministry, especially when it comes to designing your churches to attract and engage unchurched people. And so that's what we're about. And one of the ways we do that is through these periodic webinars where we jump in and talk about something that is relevant to all of us in ministry. And this webinar in particular is very cool. We picked a great one to come to if this is your first one. Because we have an amazing guest with us today, Jenn Williams, who's lead pastor of Ashley Ridge Church, just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. So you picked a great day to be here. And I'll let Jenn tell you a little bit more about her story in just a minute. But the cool thing about this webinar is this is actually the first webinar in a series of webinars we're going to be doing over the next several months. And this series of webinars is actually all based on a book that we are in the middle of writing and creating, where we have 15 different lead pastors from all around the Irresistible Church Network that are each writing a chapter that are describing the kind of church that every community needs. And so this is going to be a really great series. Thank you for joining us for this first one, and we'll keep you up to date on when the next ones are. And the book that we're talking about, that all these webinars are going to be based on over the next few months, is going to be released this coming summer. So keep your eyes out for that. That's the target date for that. But without further ado, I want to introduce you, or let Jenn introduce herself, because you guys need to know Jenn. Jenn has written one of the chapters for this book, and this chapter is specifically about how we should not make it difficult for those who are turning to God. So it's an amazing chapter about it. And as we get into that, I think it'd be helpful if you just have a little bit of context for who Jenn is and a little bit of her story. She has a very interesting story where she has a background in political science and journalism and things like that, but then discovered a call to make a difference in the world through the local church. So Jenn, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your story so we can all know a little bit more about you as we get into this today.
Yeah, absolutely. Super excited. I already saw a bunch of Pennsylvania love in the chat, which is awesome because I am a born and raised Pennsylvania girl, even though I did make it down to the South where it's warm and we don't shovel snow. So anyway, super pumped. And Louis mentioned I have a background in politics, and that feels scary. You shouldn't say that word out loud, especially this year. We're all just, don't say that. I had a very short-lived season of my life where I thought I wanted to go be in the political realm, and studied political science and journalism and worked in DC a couple summers. And I think in part it was because I am a pastor's kid. And so I grew up in the church. I love the church. And I am one of those really fortunate pastor's kids that came away from the experience loving Jesus and loving the church. So my parents rocked that. But even still, I knew the church. I had seen the church. And so I was looking for what else was out there where I could make my mark, or, just conquer the world, as many of us, think that we want to do. And so I was heading down that trajectory and had experience after experience after experience where I was reminded that there's a reason Jesus picked the church. And it doesn't always feel as flashy or as glamorous, nor should it. The older I get, the more grateful I am for that. But there's a reason he picked the local church and the local community to love people in really significant, up close, personal kind of ways. And so fortunately made a turn in that direction, did not think I was heading to pastoral ministry, had some great people along the way who were like, but all you do is preach and teach and lead things. And sometimes we miss the obvious. And so headed that direction and worked in some churches while I was in seminary. Came out of seminary, got sent to Summerville, South Carolina. Will be grateful all of my days because it's been home for 20 years now. Love, love, love Summerville, South Carolina. And came down here, worked at a church for about 5 years, and then had the opportunity to plant a church, something I never saw coming, and something that will just always be the experience of a lifetime. We're 14 years in to Ashley Ridge Church, and it has been quite a ride. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell, along with being married to an amazing human, my husband Clark, and raising 2 boys as we grow this church.
Unbelievable. Now, right in the middle of a building project, we're getting close to breaking ground and all that stuff. So lots of stuff going on. But hopefully you guys heard a little bit just from Jenn's heart there. We chose Jenn to write this chapter about a church, of how we should not make it difficult for those who are turning to God. So Jenn, why don't you get a little more specific into your story about what are some of the pivotal moments, or some of the experiences that you've had from a pastor's kid all the way to DC to planting a church. What are some things along the way that have made you so passionate about this specific thing, not just working at a church and being a pastor, but specifically a church that is not making it difficult for those who are turning to God? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I think one of the things I've learned in ministry is that for every person you encounter that says something out loud, there's a bunch of other people that were probably thinking it. And I've had some of my most powerful and profound ministry moments and experiences with people who were brave enough to say something that I think a whole lot of people find to be true. And especially as someone who grew up in church, this is my native language. I know the church, I hear the church. And so I think there's a reason that early on, God put people in my path whose stories were very different. And being encountered by that really hit some big wheels for me. And one of them in particular, there was a Sunday that I had just preached, I have no idea what about, and I was coming out, and I have this, we have a cool setup in the high school where we meet, where I can duck out the side door of the stage and catch everybody on their way out, even the people that were trying to get out before they got stuck in conversation. So I'm coming running out, and I'm waving to everybody, and I get in the lobby, and this woman who I didn't really know, I knew who she was, but I didn't really know her that well. And she's making a beeline straight across the lobby, tears running down her face. And she just hugs me. And I'm quite frankly not always a hugger. I don't initiate the hugs. I'm happy to be hugged, but I don't always initiate them. So she's got me in this hug, and I was like, oh, okay, we're doing this. And then she pulls back and looks at me, and she says, I never before believed that it was possible that God could love me. Mm. And her story is just one of a million, where she just grew up in an environment where she thought God hated her. And that had been deeply rooted in where she was. And to see her in that moment, something that felt as simple and obvious to me, because I grew up singing Jesus Loves You, this I know, for someone to say to me, I didn't believe it was possible for God to love me. And I thought, oh my goodness, what did we do? And how have we, as followers of Jesus, somehow put that out there, that that's what you believed. And so that was one. There was another early on in our church, a guy who was coming from an academic realm, came under the guise of, I'm just trying to be academic and get questions answered, but I don't believe any of this. But because we met in a school, it felt less threatening and all these other things. And the day we got to baptize him, I will never forget the complete vulnerability. And he said, never in a million years did I think I would find the answers to the questions I was asking in the church. And again, I thought, oh, what are we doing that at least at the outset, because if these people are saying it, other people believe it. And they're either not showing up at all yet, or they are sitting out there and they're just not saying it out loud, but they're still wondering if this is at all the place that's going to help them get closer to God.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I love anytime you can put individual names and faces and stories on that, it can't help but inspire you. I want to ask you a question about that. Before that, I want to make sure everybody knows, hey, we are going to have a Q&A at the end of this. We're going to have time for a Q&A. So go ahead and start throwing your questions as we go through this conversation. Throw your questions in the chat, and our team will get those to me so we can have and I can get those to Jenn at the end of this conversation so we can have a Q&A. So speaking of the individual names and faces and stories that make this come alive, this isn't just a new philosophy about how to do church. This is based on individual people and names and people you know and experiences. I know in your chapter of the book about not making it difficult for those who return to God, you mentioned specifically Annie and her story. So what is it about Annie and others like her in your church that you guys have experienced that how have you guys been able to foster an environment in your church where people like Annie and others like her feel not only welcome, but embraced by being there with you guys?
Yeah. So in the book, I do tell this story about Annie, and it's one, her stories, it's important. I mean, she's a real person, but it's important because, again, I think she represents a lot of other people. But without going into the whole thing, her question to me on the outset was, am I allowed to come to your church? Which was a question that, again, floored me. But it's been a question I've returned to time and time again, and our team has returned to time and time again when we're having the conversation of how do we create a space that says, without someone having to ask, yes, you are allowed to come here, and yes, we really want you to come here. And again, I would never, my experience, I would never have thought to ask that question. Of course you can go to the church, but I grew up in the church. There are people who didn't, who really, like, you know, part of her story too was she was already turning to God. Like, she'd had some experience. She had just gone through a health crisis. Someone had pointed her in a direction. So she was turning to God. That turn was already in motion. What she couldn't figure out if the church was a viable place to go with that turn. And so it's really shaped an approach that says, it has to be personal. We just, in more and more in a church culture, and this is, I think, churches of any size, but we have to have an approach to ministry that's personal, because people are looking around and going, this might apply to everybody else, but does it apply to me too?
Yeah.
And you know, they might be forgiven, but you don't know my story. You don't know that it extends to me. And so we've really worked hard at doing something that's personal, and approachable.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a place where people feel like they can ask those questions.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that has to be the case because you have to be approachable and personal, because you have people asking questions like, am I allowed to come to this church? And that's just a sign that, you know, church as a whole, there seems to be so many unnecessary obstacles for people to overcome who are coming to or seeking Jesus, or who are turning to God. But in your chapter of the book, you talk a little bit about how that's nothing new. That actually parallels some of the struggles of the early church as well. And so talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the chapter I wrote, the title is not mine, comes directly from Acts 15. It is, they got together, they were seeing lots of people come from different backgrounds. The Gentiles were getting close enough to the doors of the gathering. They weren't actually doors, but they were getting close enough, and it was creating all sorts of messiness and all sorts of confusion. And they got back together. And the first thing they did is they were celebrating the fact that they, had people coming. So that was good. But as they sorted through, what does that mean? Of course, they came then to this conclusion of, we should not make it difficult for those who are turning to God. And, it was James who said it. So, brother of Jesus, like, everybody get out of the way. I may not have, been his best bud when he was here, but like, Jesus is Son of God. So let's get out of the way, get people to Jesus. But obviously, Paul was such a major player in that conversation. And so you see it then over and over and over again in his letters. You're hitting those conflict points of people are starting to turn to God, and then they're just struggling with those issues of going, well, what does that mean? And how do we help them, but not give them the wrong message? How do we make sure we tell them this is a different way of living their life without pushing them out before they even got in? And I mean, I think that's such a big deal. And so, but one of the things that I'm noticing more and more, and I just have been marinating on this, especially in the writing process for a while now, is that so many times we get stuck between the ideas of legalism and lawlessness. And we're so worried about not being one or the other. And I think that's where Paul, like when he was writing to the Galatians, he's like, you're getting all confused by these legalists who are telling you that. But it's because you're afraid that you're going to end up being lawless. And he's like, don't do that either. That's not what this is about.
Yes.
He's like, there's a way that's not legalism or lawlessness, and it's following Jesus. And it's letting him be the thing that's enough. And so he keeps trying to push some of those stumbling blocks out of the way. And I love that it's Paul, because he definitely talks about all the other things, but he's like, you guys, like, let's not put a rock at the front door where they get in. Like, let's help them to know God loves them and the gospel's good news, and then we can work on the rest.
Yeah. First things first. I like how the passion came out in your voice during that answer, Jen. I liked it. That was good. So if we're going to create these kinds of churches that don't make it difficult for those who are turning to God, you talk about in your chapter, there's a few specific things that we might want to think about doing. One of those is just creating space for questions and doubts. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it's very difficult to actually do in our churches. Another thing you talk about is listening to those who leave the church, who left the church. Talk to them. What did they think? What were some things they experienced? And then the third thing you talk about is prioritizing serving opportunities, and how that is such a major part of what you guys do. So talk a little bit about exactly why providing serving opportunities is such a critical part of not making it difficult for those who are turning to God.
Yeah. So I think one of the language pieces that I hear all the time, not just in our church, but in church world in general, is you hear people talk about your church versus either, my church, our church, or just, but where I'm talking about this is specifically the people that show up. Something got them there. Something's going on. They're looking, they were brave enough to walk in the doors of the church. But over and over again, I see people walk in and their starting language is your church. I wanted to check out your church. I wanted to see what your church thinks about this. And part of not making it difficult for people is figuring out the fastest ways for people to understand that it's their church too. That church is not this foreign crazy thing, this impenetrable thing. It is a bunch of people trying to follow Jesus together and getting it wrong and getting it right and everywhere in between. And so helping people make that step, because again, it can be, the church can make it too hard when they stay in a place too long where it's your church. And so what we've discovered again and again, and it feels obvious, but I think sometimes we aren't proactive enough about it, is we have to get people serving before they are ready. and
Yeah.
also before we think they're ready.
Yeah.
Which is super scary because, navigating and working with volunteers and having the right people in the right places, it's easy to look for the people that you're like, oh yeah, they already know how this works. They've been in the church forever. They know these stories. They can run in this direction. But finding ways to get to a place where they're connected enough, because their questions start to sound different and their spiritual search and their discipleship starts to take on a whole new level once they also feel like it's their church. This is what our church is doing. And so that's always that piece. And again, one of the stories I share, but there's a million like it, is just taking someone who was showing up, who didn't go to church with his family, but they left the church where his family had been going and came to ours. And because it was new, he tried it out. The environment was cool. He liked it. People seemed not crazy until he got to know us. And then we felt crazy. But he came. It was a good time. But still very much, he was just coming along. This was not his thing. But someone on our team just had the really big wisdom to go, we need to give him a job. And the job that he ended up with was helping to set up and run some tech in our AR kids. And he started showing up and doing that, and then listening more as the kids volunteers all got there and were doing their huddles, and then started asking some questions about what was going on. And it was just such a cool thing to see that he wasn't sure he wanted to be part of a church, much less, have a job. But to then go, oh, I'm part of this, and this is a space I can ask questions, and this is now our church. And so we've worked really hard to say, yes, you want to, there's lots of due diligence you want to do with where you're putting people in roles, but the faster and the more accessible opportunities for people to feel like it's their church, the less of a stumbling block we have.
I love that. Just having opportunities for people that it doesn't really it doesn't really matter what your spiritual maturity is sometimes in certain roles, and having a place where this person can immediately just come be part of the team, let this be part of your church, and over time be able to build influence. Another thing I love about your guys' church, and sometimes churches get a bad rap for being so self-absorbed and focused on themselves. But one thing I love about you guys are not only about serving within the church, like on a tech team at your church, like you're talking about in that story, but you guys are also very involved in mobilizing your church, the people that attend your church, to serve in the community. And you guys have done all kinds of initiatives. I know, like your partnership with Ashley Ridge High School, Fox Food Center, things like that in your past. Talk a little bit more about not just the serving opportunities in your church, but how you guys prioritize and mobilize people to serve in the community as well.
Yeah. So this is one of the areas where, having done degrees in political science and journalism and then abandoned it, it's an area that still helped me. Is I'm a researcher. And so going into this whole church planting thing, I was doing all the research I could. And one of the pieces of wisdom that I grabbed a hold of that I can't take credit for, but I've always been so grateful for, is it was, as you're starting, you're going to feel like you have no extra resources. I mean, you don't have any resources. You're trying to get your church going. And so feeling like you can do anything beyond yourselves is impossible. But it's much like, giving and how we talk about that. If you don't start when you have nothing, you'll never get there when you have more. And in that, the encouragement was pick one tangible area where you can focus. And so for us, it's been in the food realm. And because we were in a high school, we had a huge open door at the beginning to provide food for kids in the high school. It's easier with elementary kids because there's not some of the stigma. With high school, it was harder. We got to work with the guidance office and find our way through that and really give the people in our church an opportunity to tangibly connect. And then that morphed over time into our food truck. So we realized, food trucks are super trendy and fun, but we also are in a community where we looked around and said, what's missing? There wasn't a place to get a hot meal every night of the week. And we couldn't do every night of the week, but we were like, what if we had a food truck and we could go directly to these parts of our community a couple nights a week, serve some hot meals? And that's just been an amazing, amazing story. I could go on and on about, because we have incredible people that run that I'm in awe of the ministry. But what's been really good is, again, as you're trying not to be an obstacle, before people can understand more about, why should I spend more of my time? I'm working a full-time job. I'm raising kids. Like why do I have more time to be on your coffee team, and do these things? There's a much easier connect to going, can we connect you though to this tangible need in our community, this community that we all live in, that we all care about. And it creates a really easy conduit. And the number of people who that's an easier first step. And we've even had a number of people, including some who were on our staff, who their first entry toward our church was serving on the food truck. And so that's just such a great way to say, if nothing else, let's stay grounded in what this is all about. Jesus said, go, love people, make disciples. And so we got to start, the loving people and making disciples turns out is really hard. So we can do the going part though. And so let's, just start there.
Yeah. Well, I feel like Jesus also said something about letting our light so shine before men that they see our good deeds and praise our Father. And I feel like what you guys are doing out in the community, the people that are checking out your church, as you remove obstacles for them, they are seeing you guys do good and even being invited to come and serve alongside you as you do good in the community. And I think that just like Jesus promised, that helps draw them to himself. That's really cool. I love that. As we get close to wrapping this up, I did want to ask a question though, because obviously you have a lot going on. You're a lead pastor of a church. You're in the middle of trying to get out of setup, tear down, to build a church, getting ready to break ground, build a church building, get ready to break ground, managing all that, all the paperwork, all of that stuff. You also have your own interests and hobbies like running and marathons. You're also a mom of 2 boys that have their own activities going on, all that stuff. So with all this stuff going on, how does the simple structure of the way you guys have designed your church, how does that help you, at least in theory, at least in theory, do everything you do without just completely being overwhelmed?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Louie and we're laughing because we talked about this offline beforehand. And I was like, I could make up a bunch of stuff about how I wish this was happening. But most of us are flying by the seat of our pants at any given moment. And I won't pretend otherwise. But we do have a cultural value. One of our primary cultural values at our church, and I think at a lot of your churches probably too, in some form or fashion, is better, not more. And it's something that, there's lots of ways to think about that, lots of uses for that. It is, prizing doing things at a high level and doing things well and intentionally and all of that kind of stuff. But it's also about saying if we don't want to get lost, and one of the big things I talk about the chapter is clarity, knowing what we are about, being able to tell people clearly what we don't do as much as what we do, and how we might be the right place that can help them move closer and closer to Christ, is just being able to say some really good no's as we say those yeses. And I would just say, with the whole having my own interests and having kids, and my husband has a job that he does that's a big job that's entirely outside of the church, even though he's an amazing, amazing volunteer in our church, is actually really helpful because it keeps me grounded where so many people are coming in and coming from as well, going, what is this all about? Can you break this down for us? Can you really focus us on what are the big pieces, and how do we start prioritizing and moving in the direction and moving our lives in the direction that are more and more like Christ. And so anyway, yeah, so it's a lot of fun, and it is important. So again, we've done a lot of cool things even in our community as we have grown and as we've gone along in the years, but we try to stay really focused. Like our food truck is, just one of that still central serving points for us, because if we try to do more, then you end up missing the personal with the people along the way who are coming with those questions, a lot of which they're not going to say out loud.
Yeah. I love that. The discipline of simplicity and being so intentional just to give people clarity. Those things are both both so important. So everybody, I've got one more question for Jenn before we get to the Q&A. I see some of you guys are already putting questions in the chat. That's awesome. My team is curating those, and they'll get those to us. But I got one more question for Jenn before we get to the Q&A. But before I ask Jenn this last question, I do have a couple of things I want to tell you about that are coming up that you might want to jot down, make a note of, put on your radar. And the first of those is that this is part 1 of a webinar series. And part 2 is coming up on February the 20th. And that'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern, just like this. Go ahead and put that on your calendar. You'll see some emails about that. But the next one, Jenn, I don't know, maybe you're in the middle of building campaign. This one has a pretty intriguing title, and it's that should churches stop building church buildings? That's what we're going to be talking about next time. So you have to tune in on February 20th and find out what exactly we are going to be diving into when it comes to that topic. So go ahead and mark that down. Another thing I want to tell you guys about is coming up in May 1st and 2nd. It's Drive Conference that we're hosting here at North Point Community Church that happens every other year. And the reason I say that is because Drive Conference dives into many, it's a holistic conference about all kinds of everything to do with local church ministry from A to Z, especially designing churches that unchurched people love to attend. But in this case specifically, Jenn is going to be leading a breakout at Drive Conference. Other authors or other lead pastors in our network that have authored different chapters of this book that we're referencing are going to be leading breakouts on these topics. So you have if you want to go further into this and come hang out with us in person for a few days, bring your team, bring your key elders, key volunteers. That's going to be a great thing. I think the website there's driveconference.com. And then the last thing I just want to put on the radar is this book we keep referencing, this untitled book that's about a church that everybody needs, where we've gotten 15 of our lead pastors from throughout our network to write a different chapter about a different aspect of this. This book is coming this summer, so be on the lookout for that. We'll let you know when it's releasing, when it's available, but just go ahead and put that in the back of your mind as well. All right, so with that said, Jenn, one more question for you, and this question is really just a pastoral moment for you as a lead pastor of a local church in Charleston, South Carolina. Planted it 14 years ago. Here you are today. What if you could just give one final message or encouragement to the leaders and the lead pastors that are here hanging out with us today on this webinar? What would it be? What would you tell them? This is your chance. You're the Apostle Paul right now, writing a letter from prison. What do you say? What do you got?
Anyone who knows me that's on this webinars right now, it's like, don't give her that flight check. Don't give her that. No, thank you for that opportunity and open door, Louie. I would just say stay in the mess. And here's why. We all know this world, everything feels crazy. Church feels tricky and complicated, and we're trying to figure out how to not make it hard, but also not confuse discipleship. And we're trying to meet people in really messy life situations. And the constant temptation, at least for me, but I think I'm not alone in this, the constant temptation is to try to solve the mess, or at least tidy the mess, so that we can put it in pockets and handle it in ways that feel more effective or efficient. Some of us thrive on efficiency. And I would just encourage all of us, and I'm speaking to myself really here so loudly, is stay in the mess. Fight the temptation to say it has to be one or the other. The tension, even in this whole conversation. And I mean, even, I've finished my part of the book. The book's still coming out, but they won't let me make any changes at this point. And the number of times I've been like, oh gosh, I would change that, or I would think about that. And I just think it's worth continuing to wrestle and one of the things I do say, and I'll end here, because I know there's some questions, is in the book, is that with those instructions, you should not make it hard for those who are turning to God. The answer isn't then that we should make it easy for those who are turning to God, because easy isn't actually an option on the menu. And so the way that I reframe it, and the way that still challenges me, is that we need to keep asking, are we making it possible for people to turn to God, or are we making it hard? for them to turn to God. And so mess is wearying and mess is hard, but over and over and over, we're told, just remember what Jesus did, the author and perfecter of our faith, and don't grow weary and don't lose heart. Stay in the mess.
Thank you. I love that distinction of it's not, let's make it easy for people. That's impossible. Anytime you are, submitting yourself to a Lord and Savior, that is not easy. But I love that what you just said, you captured the heart of James's statement in Acts is let's not make it difficult. In other words, let's not make it unnecessarily difficult. Let's not put unnecessary obstacles that don't even need to be there. Let's remove those. I love that. That's a great distinction. Thank you, Jenn. All right. Well, that said, we do have lots of questions. Let's get to some Q&A questions here. We get to put you on the spot, Jenn, for stuff you didn't even prepare for. So let's jump in here. This can be awesome. So thank you guys for putting your questions in here. The first question is, what are the top things you think people far from God may need from church that many of us miss? Things that we're, I'll just let the question say what it is. What are the top things you think people far from God may need from church that many of us miss?
I think the top thing that comes to mind is I think they need permission to come in and have time to sort it out. In other words, I think that a lot of people are afraid that if they do even make that first step in, that they're going to need to have better answers quickly, and that the pressure's going to just be way up. And I think overtly continuing to remember that people need to know, and we need to find more and more ways to say out loud to people, you can stick around here and wrestle. Like it's really okay if you haven't sorted this part out yet. And we have some thoughts and we'd love to share and we want to keep digging here with you. But it's okay for you to have space to do that. And so that's the first one that comes to mind. And I think another one that comes to mind, so I don't know if they're the top, these are top of my head, is just, I think people that we don't always think about that are far away and wondering if they can come in the church, they think that we're all a lot more similar than we actually are. And so I think that we need to own a little bit more of our quirks and our idiosyncrasies and meet people at the front door going, we're a little more different than you might imagine. And we're kind of all over the place too. So there's not one mold that you either have to fit or not fit. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of those for sure. Those are two great ones. And that does seem like a best practice. I have a weird job where I get to watch, I look at a lot of church websites and get to watch a lot of church services from around the country. And one of the things I love when people say is they're in their welcome or sometime close to the beginning of a message, they'll say something similar like, hey, this is a safe place to bring your doubts and your questions and things like that. And when I see it, I'm like, yes, because that speaks exactly what you're saying is giving people permission, letting them know up top. They don't have to figure it out. It's not like come and either figure it out real quick or we don't want you here. It's, hey, this is a safe place to let this marinate. Bring your doubts, bring your questions, and you can wrestle for a while. You don't have to just decide today. So I love that. That's great, Jenn. How about this question? So this is a good question. I'm wondering if this is from a staff position or from a tender or volunteer. But the question is, do I go to an established church to catalyze transformation, like toward an irresistible type church DNA, a church that's not making it difficult for people? Should I go to an established church to catalyze that? Or should I go to a new church launch? What are the pluses and minuses of each of those if you're trying to create a church that's not making it difficult?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I mean, I think that would totally depend. I don't know that there's an easy either or. There's both. I think I have a bias.
You planted a church, so.
Yeah, I was going to say I have a bias towards the fact that churches that are planting and overtly saying, and again, I've had to own the fact that we're not a church plant anymore. We're 14 years old. We're teenagers. So we're fully in the awkward years where you don't get to call yourselves new anymore. But still, churches that are overtly saying we're trying to reach people that no one else is reaching have a lot of energy and passion. And so if there is a passion for that, who are we not reaching? there might just be a little more there. I remember years and years ago, I was at like a small conversation thing in Atlanta. I think it was one of the first Q conferences, if anyone remembers those. But Andy was doing a breakout. It was a small group of us in the room, and he was talking about, I don't even totally remember, but he was talking about reaching unchurched people and some of that. And there was a person there that was like, I go to a church that's 175 years old. Like, what would you say to us? And his answer was, he's like, I don't have any idea. And he said, and I'm so grateful that there's really smart people that know a lot more about working in those environments. He's like, I knew that, I needed to start from the beginning. And so I think one of my answers would be, if that's a passion point for you, it might just be an indicator that you're going, I'm ready to be somewhere that's starting fresh and starting new, and nothing's out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I love that. I'm with you. I think it does depend. I mean, I talk to churches every day, and even churches within our network. I don't think the new or established is the issue. We have established churches that have transitioned to this philosophy of ministry, and obviously we have lots of brand new church plants that are planted with this philosophy. So I don't think the age or size of the church really matters. It's more the mindset of the church, like you're talking about. That's great. Okay, so how about this? So rewind now 14 years ago, and in creating this culture that we're talking about today, what are the first things you did to kind of instill that culture? First, was your church planted with that culture, or was that something you had to transition to later?
Yes and no. I think that our understanding and clarity around what we're trying to do has come along as we've been in the mix with it. I would not have been able to articulate that that's what we were doing at the start. I'll be totally honest. I didn't have a clue. I wouldn't have been able to frame that. So that's come along. But we definitely started with a mentality that to reach people who weren't being reached, we had to do things that nobody else was doing. I think that's a Mark Batterson quote that I've heard him several times. And, got to do different kinds of things. And so we definitely started, and we tried to do events and things at the outset that were the most accessible to people. And I even remember, so we started in January of 2010, but at Christmas time, as we were gearing up towards our launch and just doing more out there in the community, trying to let people know we were going to be there, we did this morning story time thing with Santa and Mrs. Claus that was just, bring your kids, we'll have cookies, and like, we want to get to know you. But it was like, how can we focus on doing the things, the energy, the limited resources we have that are going to be the easiest spaces for someone to walk into, no matter where they are in their faith journey, to have that level of exposure. And so we really focused on that. We focused on doing small groups early, and then really, really focused on getting with kids and students. And again, just knowing that sometimes they're easier. Kids are easier to walk into a new space and bring their parents with them. And so we were like, parents, I mean, as we get older, we get more cynical, for better or worse. And so let's really, let's reach out to some of these kids and these students and earn trust with families and earn the opportunity to continue this conversation together.
I love that. Yeah, those are great ways to begin instilling this culture. Now, and maybe the answer is no, I would do those same exact things. So hypothetically, if you were at an existing church that didn't currently have this kind of culture, a culture that was actively, passionately, intentionally trying not to make it difficult for those turning God, if you were in an existing church, what are some of the good starting point things you would do to start transitioning that? Is it those same exact things you just said? Easy, accessible events in the community, focusing on children and students that will more likely bring their parents? Would you say, yeah, those are the two things, no matter if it's a new church or an existing church? Or would you say, no, if it's an existing church, there might be this other thing I would think about or try?
Yeah, again, I think there's just the nuances. Sometimes in an established church, you've got a lot of these ministries going, but you need to just find a new way for people who haven't been in it yet to know that it's not too late. I mean, I grew up in established churches, and the first, the churches I did ministry in early on, I've celebrated sesquicentennials with churches, those 150-year markers. And it's really what just builds over time is people sense that there's already people there, it's already full. And so finding more and more ways to say, we're doing great ministry, but we may have accidentally put things out there in a way that said we already have all the volunteers we need, although most people don't have that problem. We're pretty good at saying volunteers, but we need people, there's room for you, we want you. And we're open to this shifting and growing. People like the idea of helping to get to speak into things and things that are established for people that are turning to God. They want to know, is there still room for me to help shape this community?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. This question takes a little bit of a turn from like trying to instill this culture or transition to culture. This is more referencing the question where you talked about better, not more.
Yeah.
So when you're applying that to like serving in the community and meeting these community, when there's so many needs in the community, how do you discern kind of the better, not more thing of what to say yes to and what to say no to, when obviously there's infinite needs out there? Like how do you run that grid, better, not more grid through your mobilizing your church to serve in the community?
Yeah. The question that we asked early on that has stayed our filtering question for that is, what can we do and not brush the surface, but what can we do that will have a tangible impact? And so knowing that there's so many things that you're always going to wish you could do more, but there's some things that it's like, we could do that, but it's not even really going to scratch the surface because the need's so much bigger. So unless we could spend 40 hours a week there, it's not really going to make a difference if we show up for an hour, if that helps. And so then we've gone, what are the things we can do that we know will make a tangible difference? And so one of them, for us over the years, because we have focused on food and we have tried to stay really specific with what's a need that we know exists in our community, we went out and looked and said, okay, what is it that doesn't exist, so that we can jump in there and not just replicate other things. But then how do we stay focused? One of the things we've done for a few years now is over the Christmas break, for the kids in the elementary schools that are getting food while they're in school over the weekend, the kids that in the community that you just know are not reliably getting to eat when they're not in school, we do 2-week food kits that are you're going to be out for 2 weeks over Christmas. And so what is it we can package, knowing that, a kindergartner can only get so much with them, but what can we package that's substantive, that's going to help? And being able to focus and go, again, yeah, there's a million needs, but when we do that, and this year at Christmas, when we did that with just 2 elementary schools, I wish we could have done every elementary school in our district, but we did it with 2 elementary schools, and we were able to get into the hands of every family they had on their list that 2-week supply. And so again, it's just, it's that question, I think, of going, how can we do something that really does make a tangible impact, and what can we do that really, we have the capacity for, in a way that's going to make a difference, instead of feeling like we did it, but did it matter?
Right. No, that's an excellent grid or filter to run that through. And obviously there may be some disagreements on the team of where that is, but that's healthy conversations to have, but it's still a great grid. So I love that. What about this next question is interesting, because a lot of what we've been talking about today, at least maybe I've accidentally been thinking about this way, is physically in person, people coming to your church, and the way your physical church building and church experiences are designed in order to not make it difficult for people. What about the online audience of either, I guess that would involve everything from social media to people watching your church services online? Do you have any learning best practices around how to not make it difficult in that space, in the digital world?
Yes.
Okay.
And yes, we've learned so much, because again, it's so hard. That's just, we're all trying to constantly solve that puzzle. But one of the things we learned, and again, it helps that for us, we've been a portable church for 14 years. So we disappeared during the week. So we got to be digital. Like we got to show up somewhere, and there's not a place for people to go. during the week. But we used to do a lot, social media felt promotional. Like, how do we tell people, so we've got coming up, come to us, come to us, come to us. And one of the turns that we made, thanks in part to a lot of great conversations with other churches in this network and people doing these same kinds of things, was realizing that those spaces needed to be outward focused. People didn't follow us in those social spaces to see more stuff they could do, especially if they were considering turning to God. Like, they're like, I'm going to need you to give me stuff, not ask stuff from me on the front end. And so that really changed the filter of what are we using our social media for and what are we putting out there. And so we prioritize in those spaces. And again, I've got like amazing people on our team that do this. So I take none of the credit here, but like they do an amazing job going, what's some really, like, what's a concrete parenting thing that's going to help somebody today? And that's what's the social media post, not the, hey, show up here at this time. And again, yes, at Christmas, are we going to boost the post that says we want you to come to our Christmas service? Absolutely. Because it is, again, if you want to find people they're willing to come, then you should. But it's using digital space to give people something more than you're asking something has been a really important shift and a filter for our team, and going, what resources are just super practical and helping somebody on Thursday afternoon? Like, what's going to help somebody on a Thursday?
Yeah. So is that primarily resource that you guys are writing or creating and making available, or are you linking to other people?
We're stealing them from really smart people out there.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So you're curating things you're finding and making them easy for people to find through your social media.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, definitely doing the whole, here's a soundbite from last week's message that, 30-second, reminder kind of thing that hopefully is helpful. But we've used Orange Curriculum forever, and the parent cue stuff that's out there. I mean, my goodness, it is parenting gold. And so again, since I don't do our social media stuff, and so half the time, like, I'll see it on the feed, and I'm case study numero uno going, oh, that was helpful. I needed to hear that. I needed someone to tell me that I'm not the only one that's dealing with that.
Okay, so that's actually a good segue to this last question. So this will be the last question today before we sign off. But the last question is actually about balancing leading a church and being a parent. So I know you have two boys. What activities did you tell me they're involved in?
So my oldest is a runner. He does cross country and track. He's in high school now. And my youngest is in middle school, and he's team sports. So he is soccer and basketball. And then, they both do some music stuff too.
Okay. So this may be a broad question, but the question, I guess, is like, as obviously balancing being a parent, two boys, and leading a church, as you've done that now with a high schooler and a middle school student, is there anything that sticks out to you as like, I'm really glad we did this, or man, I wish we would have done this differently, or here was a pitfall to avoid, or here's a best practice if I could only give you one piece of advice about leading a church and being a parent? Does anything jump out in that realm?
Yeah, I'll share this. This was something brilliant that I heard that I think I've gone back to over and over and over again. And it's the fact that I was given permission to throw the word balance out the window. And think of it so much more, and this is going to date me really a lot, but think of it more as the pogo balls that we had in the 80s.
I had one of those.
Yeah, so like, there's the rubber ball and the disc.
Like Saturn.
Yeah. And so it was great. You hopped up and down and did the thing, but more often than not, you were leaning one way or you were leaning the other way. Like, more of the time you were there. And someone told me early on, they're like, if you spend all your energy trying to balance, then you're going to spend all your energy trying to balance. And so just get comfortable with the idea that there's going to be seasons that you're leaning this way, but then if you don't want to fall, you are going to have to lean back this way. And so if anything, I would just say giving permission to let go of the idea of balance. And then the other thing I'll say is my family, more often than not, they're my saving grace because the opportunity, the need, and the desire to be present and invest in them is the thing that helps me more than ever. It's so easy to get consumed in ministry and burnout. We all know that. There's so much out there on that, and I've run right up to all those lines too. But having a family and having such a desire to be present and not miss these years with my kids has actually pulled me back from that line in sometimes in ways that are just really, really beautiful for me. So my kids, after all their counseling in their adulthood are, going to hear lots from me about how they were such a saving grace in helping me see the bigger picture. So parenting and leading a church together is hard, but it can be done, and they can actually be a really beautiful complement to each other.
That's awesome. I love it. Jenn, thank you. This was great. I want to keep going, but we're almost at an hour, so I hear you're supposed to cut these off around this time. So thank you so much for jumping on here today and being willing to talk about pieces of the chapter that you wrote for a book and all kinds of other things. So thank you for your willingness on that. Hey, everybody, make sure you jot down that February 20th, we'll have part 2 of this webinar series where we'll talk about should churches continue to build church buildings. So let's get ready to tune in and talk about that. Also, make sure you have Drive May 1st and 2nd on your calendar. Just so you know, the price increase does go up February 1st. So go to the website and take care of that before then. And yeah, look for the book coming out this summer. Thank you guys for joining us today. Have a great rest of the week. Jenn, you got anything fun going on tonight, or just a night at home with the fam?
Laundry, prepping my kids to leave for winter retreat with students this weekend.
Oh, okay. There we go. I love that. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you. See ya. Have a good one.